Everybody knows, and everybody in the world knows, that Korea has achieved unprecedented rapid growth and transformed itself from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the wealthiest. There's absolutely no question in my mind that so much of Korea's success was driven by the focus on education. I think there's no question about that. So I just want to give you a little background about the World Bank, because what the World Bank has done with Korea is a very interesting way of looking at the Korean development. So again, I was born in 1959, and in 1959, the official position of the World Bank was that Korea was too poor to get a World Bank loan. Almost anyone could get a World Bank loan. What they said specifically was that Korea was rural, that Korea's educational attainment was much lower, still recovering from the war. They also pointed out that all of the industrial capacity and most of the mineral wealth were in North Korea, right? They were thinking, the final sort of conclusion was, Korea would need just direct aid for a very long time. They were not going to be able to sustain their economy without a lot of direct aid. So finally, the World Bank was considering making its first loan to Korea, and the first loan was for a 고속도로, a highway, about $14 million. And then the second loan that Korea took was for education. This was 1969. And when they took that loan for education, inside the World Bank, people made fun of Korea. These guys are crazy. Why would they take a loan for education? They know they should focus on infrastructure, highways, energy. That's what's really needed in Korea, not education. So that was a very important phase in Korean history, and the fact that they did prioritize what's called soft infrastructure versus the hard infrastructure of roads and energy, I think was really important for Korea's success. And the story, the president of the East Asia region of the World Bank Group put a pile of papers on my desk, like the second month that I was at the World Bank. And he wrote to me was, funny how wrong we get it sometimes.
총장님, 그렇다면은 조금 더 구체적인 세계은행의 역할이 있을 것 같은데요.
So, as World War II seemed to be coming to a close, representatives from the ministries of finance of many countries in the world came together in a tiny town in New Hampshire. And then there were representatives from the Treasury of the United States and about 45 countries. And so they got together and they said, after the war, we're going to have to do things to make sure that the global economy is stable, right? And the World Bank, it wasn't called the World Bank at the time, it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, was formed to support the rebuilding of Europe. Because World War II, Europe was just destroyed. So we call it IBRD, was specifically built in order to support European development. But General George Marshall announced at the Harvard commencement that he was going to launch the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was one of the largest direct aid programs in the history of the world. So IBRD had to find something to do, and so they decided that they were going to focus on poverty elimination. They were going to provide loans. And so let's just take one example, African country. Because people think that an African country is so risky, so if they're going to borrow $1 billion, there will be very few banks that will even consider lending to these countries. But if they do, it will be something like, they have to pay it back in 3 years and they'll charge over 10% interest, right? But if they go to the World Bank and they get an agreement with the World Bank, they can pay the World Bank loan back over 30 years, and the interest rate, and again, I'm not giving you an actual interest rate, but in terms of scale, it will be 4% instead of over 10%, right? And For the 77 poorest countries in a program called IDA, right, they give you money, you get a 10-year grace period where you don't have to pay anything, and then you pay back over 30 years. So it's a 40-year loan at 0% interest. And the developing countries love getting money from the World Bank because they also get free technical assistance in addition to doing it. Once you can agree on what you're going to borrow for, it's great. You know, free technical assistance, support all the way through, getting money at rates that you never would be able to get otherwise. All right, but now let's go back to education. What happened in Korea so that an educational system that was the envy of the world became referred to by Korean young people as Hell Joseon, right? What happened in Korea? According to the Korean Educational Development Institute, about 49.2% of Korean parents responded that private education expenses are a heavy burden, right? In reality, half of children under the age of 6 receive private education, half under 6. And even among children under 2 years old, 25%, 1 in 4, is receiving private lessons. So, you know, this story just came out, right? One of the famous English language institutes. So, Hell Joseon means that there's a cruelty of the experience. What I've heard from some young people is, I am not going to have children. Why would I subject another human being to the hell that I had to go through? Okay. So let me just give you one piece of data, right? 1960, when I was born, right? The birth rate was still six children per woman, right? And at 0.72, I just told you, there was the rate in 2023. So at 0.72, if 2.1 is what's required to replace the population, the births in Korea are 1/3 of what's required to replace the population. And in Seoul, it's even lower. It's not 0.72, it's 0.55. So just to, you know, at a birth rate of 0.72, right? Just to make it very clear, 100 Koreans today will give birth to 36 children. Those 36 children will grow up, become adults, and they will give birth to 13 children. Those 13 children will grow up and give birth to 5 children. So 100 people today are going to be replaced by 5 people in just 4 generations, right? So this means that 16 million Koreans will disappear. And in terms of the age of its population, again, will be the highest in history. Half the population will be over the age of 65. Less than 10% will be under 25. And children under 5 will make up 1% of the population. Then you have to ask the question, so how can Korea increase its birth rate? And of course, you can't force Korean women to have children. And there are a lot of incentives now. And I think the monthly stipend or, you know, direct benefit from having a child went up from, you know, I think it was 40만 원 to 80만 원, something like that. It was increased, and there was a tiny increase in the birth rate. But you know, unfortunately, the experience is that those kind of direct subsidies for women to have children haven't really worked very well anywhere in the world. So if we're serious about tackling this issue, I think what we have to do is, first of all, really try to understand the situation in Korea. There's a lot of interesting research. There are very brilliant Korean scholars who are working on this already. But we have to gather the data that we already have, and we have to especially do, you know, different kinds of research to get even more information. Interesting things are already happening. So in one survey, 26% of unmarried women respondents in Korea said that they would consider having a child without getting married. This means that as the number of unmarried women increases, the number of voluntary single mothers is also growing. And of course, an example is the celebrity Sayuri.
예, 예.
So Sayuri had a child, and the sperm donor came from Japan. Sorry, is it okay to talk about sperm in 어쩌다 어른?
I'm okay.
뭐 의학적 용어니까요.
그렇죠, 그렇죠.
Because we're 어른이니까. And so you might ask, why would the sperm donor come from Japan? Part of it is that Korea's laws are still very restrictive. If a woman wants to get a sperm donation, they have to have a husband. And it goes even further than that, either a husband or a common law partner. And the partner, the male partner, has to have some kind of disease or problem so that their sperm is not viable.
아, 결격 사유가 있어야 되는구나.
But in most of the rest of the world, including Japan, it's much easier to get access to sperm donations. Well, you know, Japan for 25 years has been working very hard on increasing their birth rate. So in Japan, one of the things they did to increase the birth rate was they made paternal and maternal leave much easier, right? They instituted lots more support for new mothers, right? And Prime Minister Kishida was the foreign minister when I was visiting Japan very frequently. And Prime Minister Kishida said, okay, we have done everything that you can possibly do. We now look like Norway or Sweden in terms of our social support. So please don't tell me to do more, because I don't know of anything more we could do. And in 2023, Japan's birth rate was almost double Korea's birth rate. Right?
Wow.
Now, China, their birth rate is still over 1, right? But remember the one-child policy? Now it's the 3-child policy, right? They're actively encouraging, but they've also looked very carefully at how to increase the birth rate. So what they've done is take on something called the hukou system, right? So in China, it used to be that if you were not legally married, it was almost impossible to register a child under the hukou system. And the hukou system is what gives you the right to have education, healthcare, and services, right? So now a woman, no matter how they have the child, through a surrogate, through adoption, no matter how they have the child, in most provinces, they can register the child and the child will have access to education, healthcare, and everything. So, you know, immediately they have done something that has led to many new stories about people. You know, there's a very famous economist, a friend of mine, who had 3 children, one by adoption, one by surrogacy, one with a partner, right? And now the stories are everywhere. So everything's changed, right? This has been a very interesting development for China. So. We really have to develop a much deeper and broader knowledge of what's going on in Korea, but also all the innovations that are happening all over the world. And I think, you know, first of all, we're going to need very strong leadership from government officials, but also the private sector. I don't know if it's exactly what should be done, something like it. Patient after patient after patient that was suffering from drug-resistant tuberculosis. I told you a little bit about it earlier. And these are people with tuberculosis in which the tuberculosis bacterium is resistant to the most powerful drugs, right? So the World Health Organization had officially declared that they're not treatable. And so they literally, World Health Organization had declared a death sentence on every person in a poor country that suffered from this disease. So we thought, hey, this is our chance. Maybe we can do something on a much bigger level. So we started treating the patients. That's when we had to borrow $100,000 worth of drugs from Brigham and Women's Hospital. And we started having success. These patients that they said were uncurable, we started getting cures, and we reached 85% cure.
와, 선구자시네.
So this group of patients that WHO had said are untreatable, the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization both said, do not treat them. Do not treat them because they're untreatable. They said the drugs are too expensive. You cannot treat MDR-TB. What are you accusing us of? So it was a fight. We had to fight. So we did everything from lowering the drug prices. So doing a few quick things that I'd learned from being in Korea studying the 약국s. And we lowered the drug prices for the MDR-TB. We lowered the price of the drugs by 90%. We started, and we treated 50 cases in one town of 100,000 people. That ended up changing the world.
We have a clip to play for you.
Fue una lucha en la que fue bien dura. Que
That's
familia,
milky
tanto de personas que realmente estuvieron ahí.
This is what a transformation, my God. To think we almost let him die.
That was so interesting. We thought, oh my God, this tiny group of people in this tiny organization, we can change the world. So I never stopped doing that. All the other titles were temporary, but that has stayed with me until today.